honorable speaker and learned members on the dais and my colleagues in front of me, students and other fellow guests. So when you are asked to speak after two speakers who have already spoken on your topic, it becomes a little bit difficult task. And also, it becomes a little bit easier in the sense that you know that there are certain things which you can just leave. So my topic is to talk on interstate council. It is integral part of what we call as, in the sense that to actually operationalize relationship between center and state. But since my mandate is only confined to fiscal federalism, so I will mellow down or narrow down the idea of interstate council in the context of fiscal federalism. So before going further and looking into the logic of fiscal roles which an interstate council is supposed to play, I will take some time in actually laying down that what it is supposed to do and in what context interstate council would be helpful in doing that. So we know as a matter of fact that the term fiscal federalism is not a constitutional term in that sense because it was coined by Richard Musgrave in 1959, who was an economist. So fiscal federalism essentially is a term relating to economic planning. It is, of course, it has been given a constitutional status under our constitution, that is Article 263, specifically talks about the idea of interstate council. Now, one of the things which Constituent Assembly did, that so many things it actually operationalized immediately. With respect to other things, it left to the wisdom of future government and the parliament to operationalize those concepts. So interstate council being one of those ideas. And it only in 1990, it actually materialized when the presidential order, as is required for the purposes of 263, was actually issued. Now, one of the things which I must also flag at the onset, that is, we understand that there are many of political compulsions when legislatures at different level actually interact. But at the same time, we must not be oblivious to what we call as structural issue and not confine us only to episodical issues. That is case mein kya hua? Rather than looking into that, we'll have to look for a larger picture. Over a period of time, how it has been working. That only will allow us to actually rectify the problems which are there. So one of the things which you can always see that it was operationalized quite late, 1990, so since 1950 to 1990, the central government essentially, because presidential notification is nothing but the advice of the Central Council of Ministers, decided not to come up with interstate council. Or it is not to suggest nothing else was there because they might have thought that Finance Commission is there, Planning Commission was working, so they must have thought that these are the institutions which will take care of that. Maybe it is the logic of coalition politics which actually compelled the central government to come up with interstate council. Now, idea-wise, it was supposed to meet at least thrice a year. But we know as a matter of fact, hardly a dozen meets have happened in so many years. That is, it is 32nd year of presidential notification. And it is irrespective of the government. So it is not about one government or the other government. So you know as a matter of fact that in 2016, after 10 years, the interstate council meeting happened. So the last meeting was 2006 and then only in 2016. So this also is an idea which says that we must not only talk about what is the language of the constitution or the law. More important is to actually look into the working of constitution, that how constitution is working. So in that context, it appears that central government, irrespective of which party or which kind of alliance is there, always think that interstate council meetings may not be conducive for what we intend to do. And that is what state legislatures, irrespective of political affiliation, is supposed to bring their collective wisdom together, irrespective of whatever other political affiliations, that it is imperative to have a periodic interstate council meeting. And it is not a issue of serious compromise, as my previous speakers have already suggested, that we'll have to actually acknowledge elephant in the room. That is, come what it may be the intention and all this kind of thing, Indian federalism essentially is skewed in favor of center. So that is a reality of a day. Of course, it is much more wider than what it used to be, say, in 1950, but surely it is much more centralized. So that is what Constitution actually does. So the idea is this, that ultimately decision would be made by the respective legislatures only. So Interstate Council is not an institution which is supposed to actually definitively make a decision. It is a recommendatory body. Now, under those circumstances, it is very important that we must be having an effective recommendation, and that can happen only through Interstate Council. Now, we know as a matter of fact that distribution of all list, that is 7th schedule, was based on this idea that things which are of national importance should be with center, things which are of local importance should be with the states, and the things which have a kind of flexible character, essentially of local importance, but sometimes attains a national character and requires uniformity, are in concurrent list. Same is the logic with respect to fiscal federalism also. That is, if you'll see, the other economist from United States of America, William Oakes, actually suggested that while fiscal planning, the most important thing which is to be looked into is this, that which would be the effective place where the policies can be better understood and effectively implemented. So that is the whole idea. And that is not, and we can learn from something which is quite extraordinary. We are talking about states which are part and parcel of the same country. Just think about European Union. European Union is conglomeration of countries. So sovereignty issue is much more there. But they also recognize what we call as principle of subsidiarity. That is, they say that although European Union has a parliament, but things which are of local importance has to be left to the nation which is supposed to decide. So that is an idea which is Interstate Council must take care of. Now, Vijay Kelkar, our erstwhile governor of Reserve Bank, Raghuram Rajan has dealt with so many of issues in this area. So essentially the idea of Vijay Kelkar committee was this, that there are multiple pillars of this fiscal federalism, and he thought that Interstate Council happens to be most important pillar because of the fact that one, planning commission has been done away with, and secondly, GST Council is essentially not much more recommendatory in that nature, or not having a wider kind of vision which an interstate council can have. That is the kind of ambit which it can have. So rather, his idea was this, that interstate council can help effectively in understanding GST issues also. That is how that has to be taken care of. The other thing which all of us might have realized this point of time, which would have been difficult if I would have been speaking about all this, say, in 2019. So two important things which happened, that is COVID. So we realized that how COVID is not only a health issue. COVID actually is an issue which affects the fiscal distribution also. That is who will do what and all this kind of thing. And in what manner effective allocation of resources can happen for the purposes of meeting health emergency, for the purposes of meeting so many of demands which can arise. So that was one. The second was the failed agricultural bill. So although all this are otherwise will appear as a domain of public health, other will appear as a domain clearly of agriculture, but essentially what were the rationale which were behind all this? So we know as a matter of fact in case of COVID, so just classic example, initially central government said that you would be buying your vaccines and we would be buying our vaccines separately, so on and so forth. So essentially these are all fiscal issues that ultimately who should be taking that tab? Ultimately the idea is this, that if you're buying something, somebody had to pay. And similarly in cases of agricultural marketing amendments and all this kind of thing, we know as a matter of fact that that it has a deep-rooted connection with the state fiscal issues. That is, all these boards, agriculture boards and all these kind of things actually are great source of revenue for the purposes of state. So under those circumstances, these are also fiscal issues which we are supposed to look into in the larger context. So fiscal issue cannot be one, that is quite obvious, that is one which is very narrow. So interstate council's mandate with respect to fiscal issue should be one, classical fiscal issue, that is we understand that taxes are there. We know as a matter of fact, I will not go into details of all this because my previous speaker has already spoken about that we know there are different kind of taxes, who will collect, who will actually ultimately distribute and all those kind of things. And in this context, an interstate council has another role also to play, because we know as a matter of fact that initially, with respect to all fiscal distribution, we were talking about only 2 tiers of governance, that is center state. Conveniently, we forget the 3rd tier of the governance. And that is something which was quite important, and that is something, although not identical to what our father of nation would have expected, Mahatma Gandhi, that is the village governance and all this kind of thing, but it is something closer to what his idea was. And that is also something closer to the simple idea that is fiscal federalism actually also warrants that the governance at the root level, because once we recognize this principle, and state cannot actually what we call as run with hare and hunt with hound, that is when they are talking with center, they'll say that you must delegate and our rights are to decide at the local level. Similarly, states at their intra-state level must also realize that the same responsibility of the state is towards this grassroots level organization, that is the 3rd tier of the governance, panchayat, and the municipalities and all this kind of thing. So that is also something which is required to be discussed at the interstate council level. That is very important. The third thing, which because of the fact that now, as we know, that planning commission has been done away with. Okay, so essentially, it is finance commission which will essentially recommend. Now, one of the other things which interstate fiscal council is supposed to talk about, and it may require many of deliberation with respect to whether it will require some amendment to the laws and the constitution. That is, in the context of that, in what manner distribution can be done, because it leaves much of leeway. And as one of my previous speaker was talking about, that one idea can be this, that the states which are performing better should be given better allocation. And Raghuram Rajan committee and Arvind Panegriha also suggested that under those circumstances, you should categorize states. That is, there are certain states that are doing quite well with respect to use of resources which are allocated to them, fiscal resources. So under those circumstances, what you should be doing, there should be automatic triggering mechanism. That is, the power of delegation should not be so clearly in the hand of deciding authority. There should be automatic triggering mechanism. That is, you allow them to spend, and only if there are certain riders, then you see that those riders are whether followed or not. But this also is oblivious to this idea, which most of the times we don't see that is being actually talked about in the policy framework. Of course, the state which are there situated will always talk about. Yeah, so it's 13 minutes, I will wind up. So, my stopwatch is saying 13. So under those circumstances, the realization has to also dawn that, as we always say, that the growth rate is decided by the slowest mover. So you cannot actually think about, when you are talking about allocation of resources, that it should be only in the sense that only those who are doing well should be given resources, okay? Because ultimately, whether country as totality prospers or not would be decided on in the light of how those part of the country are faring which are not so better off. That is there. The other thing is we should, and that would be the last thing, that is because of the time constraint, that is we also are supposed to look into impact of Article 288(2) of the Constitution, which decisively tilts the fiscal idea and distribution of the powers. Because 282 says that irrespective of who has legislative competence to frame laws on a subject matter, in cases of need, allocation can be made to an area which is not whether confined to center or the state. So ideally it is okay, but how it has actually worked? Because ultimately resources are with center. So it has made center much more powerful. So just for example, Rural Employment Guarantee Program, Education Act, and all this kind of thing. So with respect to the policies which are supposed to be taken care of the local level, because center has the power to fund under 282, they start funding. So it's okay they are starting funding directly. But interstate council must take up this issue, that is with respect to how fund allocation must happen. That is okay, you give all this kind of policy, but implementation and ultimate at micro level decision with respect to how this allocation would be done should be left to the state.